Hello and welcome. Welcome back to our continuing reading chronological through the Bible. When we left Abraham yesterday, Isaac was growing and everything was well. Today's reading, we're going to begin a shift in focus from Abraham to Isaac, the one who's going to now, of course, carry forward this promise of God. Chapter 22 begins with God's command to Abraham that he should sacrifice Isaac, to God. The command must surely have seemed, contradictory to Abraham for any of a number of reasons, but it was God's command. Abraham was sure of that. So Abraham and Isaac set out for the sacrifice. When they came to the place designated for the sacrifice, Mount Moriah, on which Jerusalem will eventually be built, Abraham and Isaac left the two servants behind and proceeded alone. Isaac was carrying the wood, Abraham carrying the knife and the fire. Notice that Abraham tells the servants, I and the boy will return to you. Abraham had faith that God would raise Isaac from the dead if that was what it required in order for him to be able to carry forward the promise as God had said that he would. Isaac questions where the offering is, and Abraham tells him that God himself will provide the lamb for the offering. You know, that Isaac allows himself to be bound indicates that Isaac too trusts the Lord. And just as Abraham was about to slay Isaac, God stops him and does indeed provide the lamb, or a ram who's caught in the thicket. God speaks again to Abraham. He reaffirms the covenant, and Abraham and Isaac return home. Now, chapter 23 begins with the death of Sarah. Abraham buys a plot of land to use to bury her, and actually, eventually, Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah will all be buried on that plot. It turns out that Rachel dies near Bethlehem when she is giving birth, and so she has to be buried in that area, not in Bethlehem per se, but in that general area. The narrative now shifts strongly to Isaac in chapter 4. The narrative about Isaac receiving Rebekah as his wife is the single longest narrative in Genesis. Abraham is old at this point. He charges his servant to get a wife for Isaac, and Abraham's relatives, a wife for Isaac from Abraham's relatives, rather than from the Canaanites of the area where they are living. Abraham does not allow the servant to take Isaac with him, but tells the servant that God will provide a wife. So the servant departs. He leaves with 10 camels. It's enough to take gifts for the bride and for her family, and to bring back the bride and her company on the returning trip. The servant arrives at a well in the area, and in the area where Abraham's family resides, and he prays for a very specific sign that he himself names to indicate who the woman is that God had picked to be Isaac's wife. Don't let it slip by you that the servant has faith just as Abraham does. Actually, we can assume that Abraham and all of his family, all the people that made up the group that Abraham lived with, I'm sure all had the faith of Abraham. After the servant's prayer, Rachel comes to get water at the well, and she fulfills the signs the servant had asked for. So the servant gives her armbands, gold armbands as gifts, and he explains why he is there. Rachel runs home to her mother's household to share the story, and Laban, not Rachel, but Rebekah runs home. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Rebekah runs home to her mother's household and shares the story with the household and with Laban, Rebekah's brother. He comes out to meet the servant, and he invites the servant into the home to eat. But the servant refuses to eat until he has finished the business that he came for. The servant does receive permission for Rebekah to go, and Rebekah agrees that she will go. So the very next day, Rebekah's mother and her brother actually tried to delay her departure. They wanted to stay around for another 10 days, but the servant insists that they leave right away. Rebekah agrees, and the family lets them go. So the servant and Rebekah and their and those who are accompanying them travel back to the area where Isaac is. When the servant and Rebekah arrive in that area, Isaac sees them coming and he begins to walk to them. And Rebekah actually sees Isaac coming and she wonders who that is. The servant at this point now refers to Isaac as his master, indicating that the promise has passed from Abraham to Isaac. And if you recall, when you're reading, watch for it, but you'll see that when Abraham sent him, it was Abraham's servant, and now the servant is referring to Isaac as his master. When Rebekah finds out, as I had already mentioned, that it's Isaac that's coming, she veils her face, as is customary for the fiancé to do. The servant tells Isaac the story of how Rebekah came to be the one that he brought home to her, and Isaac takes her to his mother's tent. She becomes his wife, and God blesses him to love her and to find comfort in her after his mother's death. You know, notice that contrary to the children's rhyme that we probably all learned as kindergartners, it isn't first comes love and then comes marriage. Here it's first comes marriage and then comes love. Well, may God be with you and bless you. Tomorrow we will continue with the further information about what happens with Abraham now, and then the beginning of Isaac's family and God's blessing and so on of Isaac. May God be with you and bless you. I look forward to joining with you again tomorrow.